Good morning, everybody. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Dominique. I am an account management and planning at Borshoff with a focus on advertising and brand strategy. We are pleased to have RJ Gerard, who is the Director of Accounts at Smari, and Ben Carlson, who's Corporate Senior Vice President, General Manager, Film, Television, Streaming at MarketCast. As we all know, there were a lot of changes in 2020, especially with how we work. A lot of those changes will probably continue past the pandemic. So RJ, how did traditional research fundamentals kind of pivot, and how can we capitalize on that moving forward?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, thank you for having me here today. I certainly appreciate it. I've enjoyed our experiences in the past and working with your organization. One of the first things that jumps out to me is one of the most profound and notable changes as it relates to how we conducted research and the things that we did relates to what do we do on the qualitative side of things. Obviously, a big component of what we do is focus groups, and we have our own market research facility with the viewing room and great big table. And in-person market research was at the cornerstone of my qualitative experience and the things that I've done over the years. But given the COVID scenario, obviously that was no longer going to be a viable route for conducting qualitative research. We had done extensive amounts of online focus groups in the past, but it never was primarily the main arrow in the quiver, if you will. It was just another tool to use, but it became the primary source and the primary go-to for us, obviously, because we could not conduct in-person research. And it took a lot of convincing to our clients for them to understand that you can get very similar, if not more insightful types of insights from consumers. The online focus groups are tremendously beneficial platforms specifically for consumers. They like it quite a bit. And it really was this big pivot of how do you do a large volume of qualitative research without the ability to go on location, to do things in person, and how do you help our clients better understand that, one, this is a viable option for capturing customer insights, and two, it's remarkably successful for the types of insights that it can gather, and just the level of comfort that consumers have with the online format. Typically, we do a lot of chat-based focus groups. We also have the ability to incorporate some video elements to it. So if you want to observe and watch the nonverbals and the physical cues from your respondent, you have the ability to do that as well. But for us specifically, it was how do we typically, when we would do, let's say we did 100 focus groups out of the year, and maybe 75 of them or 50 of them might have been in person. We went completely the opposite way. I did a bunch of in-person research in January, and that was the last time I did in-person market research qualitatively for the rest of the year. And then, really kind of begs the question of what the future will look like as our clients have come to experience such a remarkable success. We get great insights. Participation rates are through the roof. Recruiting is much easier because you strip out a lot of barriers to wanting to go to a location. And in-person research has this whole other host of potential challenges for the research participants. It begs the question of what the future will hold. But really for us, it was this pivot from utilizing traditional in-person sessions to moving them almost exclusively to an online forum.
RJ, were you seeing with the clients having hesitation going to that format, and then after experiencing it, their comfort level now being possibly more open to doing that moving forward, even once we are able to gather?
Yeah, 100%. And it's some of our clients that had some experience in conducting online focus groups, though they were easier to convince, obviously because they had seen the fruits and benefits of it. As I mentioned, we had been doing it for close to 10 years. And, the ease of use in terms of just logging on and the interaction that you can have with our folks that we call observers, or our clients that are in the back room. We have two moderators that will participate in a Smari online focus group. So one person is essentially managing the chat or the discussion with the research participants. We have another individual that can communicate directly with the folks that are in the back room, our client observers. So there's a dialogue throughout the entire discussion, which makes it extremely difficult to do so in the traditional in-person setting. So there are a lot of benefits to that. And once you just see that the level of insights, that's the biggest question is, can I get the same type of information? Will participants convey what's going on, in whatever the subject matter is in the same manner? And obviously we were consistently finding that people, when you're not performing for the glass, you're not competing for airtime with other individuals seated at the table. You strip out a lot of those barriers, and people are much more candid and much more forthright, that the level of insights in many ways is almost better than your traditional setting. And it's just easier. You can log on, like I'm in my basement right now, or I can log on from my kitchen table. I don't have to worry about daycare for my kids, or I can have my dog next to me. I might have a glass of wine. There's other things like that that just make it a more casual and an easier process, if you will, than having to drive or go somewhere. Not to mention the cost benefits for clients, because you're not traveling, and market research facility costs and things like that.
Right. And a glass of wine with anything is
Exactly.
And Ben, how in your, the vertical that you're in, I'm sure that everything has kind of been a different world. And how has it pivoted? And what kind of things do you see moving forward that this is going to be a positive?
Yeah, and I apologize in advance for all my cheesy movie references. But you know how in the Fast and the Furious movies, Vin Diesel will hit the NOS button on his car and it'll just take off like a rocket. That's really what COVID did to the acceleration of a change in consumer behavior. I think we could all look forward and see that, like, you were going to have more access to first run movies in your home through streaming services. You were going to have more freedom for where you worked from as it related to technology and the ubiquitousness of things like Zoom, that things like telehealth were going to be on the rise. All these things were trends, but when I would talk about them, I would talk about those in like 5 and 10 year time horizons. And we went through all of that in about 6 months. And the fact that consumers are changing behavior and changing opinions around behaviors so rapidly, it has begged for more, faster research. And so that's the thing that, I've spent a lot of the last year thinking about, is how do we unlock those patterns of change? How do we capture them and put data around them in closer to real time, and then speed the sharing of those insights with our clients so they can react and respond to them. So it really, it's amazing how fast everything is now. When we used to think about, hey, we'll do a research project once a year, maybe once a quarter to just keep our pulse on things. Now things are changing so rapidly that we have to think about a whole new array of ways to keep up with consumers as they're changing behaviors.
Yeah. And I think that we as consumers are expecting things to happen fast, right? We want something and we want it at the palm of our hand. Mm-hmm. So quickly. And that was happening, like you said, but last year really it was on speed and moved so quickly. How do organizations continue? What would your recommendation be of how they can do research faster at half the time as they were before, and within the same budget, and in most cases with smaller budgets?
Smaller budgets are always hard, but I think it means that you have to be creative. And I think what RJ was talking about from a qualitative perspective is absolutely true. Like moving to virtual groups and virtual IDIs, like that allows us to drain some cost out of the qualitative research equation and speed it up. So, we're embarking on a global qual project right now for a client. And there are 13 different countries involved. Now, like if we had been approaching this in a more traditional research way a few years ago, we would have been putting people on planes and they're going everywhere, and there's a huge cost to that, both in money, but probably even more importantly in terms of time. And now we're able to collapse the time equation and do it much faster. We've also thought about kind of a multifaceted approach to research, where you've got your major qual and quant studies, but then also what can we learn from behavioral data and unlock trends in behavior through data science. So looking at digital signals, looking at sales receipts, and being able to plug in a data science component. which can move faster than the process of asking people for their opinions. And also on top of that, looking to places like social media,
Right.
which is where I got my start in research, where, that real-time fire hose of conversation that's taking place. How do you monitor that? How do you contextualize it? How do you use that for that always on source of signals, so that when you do see those spikes or those shifts in opinion, then you can go in and qualify and quantify through more traditional research means. So it's just kind of expanding the toolkit of research and applying it in different ways to be able to keep pace.
Yeah. RJ, how about you and kind of with your clients and those conversations you're having, like what are you recommending for them in getting more done for less?
Yeah, to echo Ben, sometimes smaller budgets can be a little bit challenging. It can put some guardrails on some different things that we'd like to do. But to Ben's point about technology isn't just making product delivery faster, but it's also making our ability to deliver research faster. Whether it's a customer research project for a while could have taken anywhere from 8+ weeks if we're doing both a couple of different phases of you have qualitative and then you follow up with your quant. Maybe you're doing another following up with qual again to mine for additional insights. But now we can do quick turns and customer panels and iteration methods that make it so much more possible for us to do things in a week to 2 weeks. And some of that requires having the right partners for this type of quick research or quick turns, meaning that it really there's not a lot of time for multiple survey iterations or survey by committee. It takes a lot of trust with our clients to work fast because there are a lot of tools in place at times that we all have to touch and work with in order to get the research done in a fast pace. And I recognize that given what's going on in the world today, we need to work fast and move fast. The challenge with that becomes, can we mine for the insights and the research nuggets that we want to when we have to accelerate really quick? Ben talked about, being able to go where the users are and find their source, drink it from the fire hose where they are. And I think that's really important to be able to do that. We do have, obviously the shorter the window, the smaller the budget. It does put some parameters on what we can do. Technology has helped us move quicker and be able to do more. But unfortunately, it's some of the scope and the level of insights of what we can get sometimes does have to kind of pay that price if we have to put certain parameters on things, and we can't. We're limited from a time standpoint. There's only so much we can do. But yeah, we can move pretty quick right now.
Dominique.
Yeah.
We have a question, and rather than read this, the question is from our friend Wendy Maringer. Wendy, if you'd like, I'd love for you to ask this question directly if you want to unmute for a moment. It's around the voice of the customer. So.
Yeah. Hey, good morning, everybody. Thanks, Catherine. Good to see everyone. Dominique, good to see you. It has been a long time, past life. My question is around ongoing voice of customer and kind of the constant listening that is happening. The rise of that in many organizations versus seeing research as a one-time event, maybe related to COVID and the need or the opportunity to be listening all the while instead of research being we have something we're trying to solve for or want to know more about and digging in for a one-time panel or a one-time survey. But how does voice of customer play into your work?
For my clients, it's critical, and we do it in a couple of different ways. I mean, I think there's for some clients who are comfortable with kind of more traditional research models, there's ongoing survey. We have some that we're always in field on, and to be able to do that, a lot of times we spin up kind of syndicated products. So that cost of being always in field to understand what customers are thinking, and then applying it to an entire category. In my case, we have a streaming tracker where we're constantly surveying people to ask about what they're watching, what they're subscribing to, what they're thinking about canceling, because it's changing so rapidly. I mean, we've had 7 major streaming services launch in the last 14 months. We do that always on, so that then those streaming clients can subscribe and see those real-time insights. Social media is the other place where it's just such an amazing source of that always on conversation. The biggest challenge there is really contextualization, because you can see one tweet and overreact to it, or you can see thousands and underreact. And how do you know what's real? So that's one of the things that we spend a lot of time on in our world is that contextualization, making sure that the conversation's coming from real customers, from real people, not, a small angry core. A lot of times I'll give news to a client where I'm like, okay, this seems really bad because it's super negative, and here's a viral tweet of somebody who hates you. But here's the good news. It's like, a 14-year-old girl in Indonesia, and literally not anyone who would be giving you any money. So let's take a look at the people who are really core to it. That contextualization also has to be put around what is it that you're talking about. And in my world, like movies and TV shows get so much conversation that we're dealing with hundreds of thousands and sometimes even millions of mentions in social media and all of the various digital signals that we're looking at. So we're thinking about kind of big data for a smaller business or maybe somebody who's B2B. Just a few mentions could be a really effective signal. So you have to kind of contextualize it that way. And then the last way to contextualize in social media is thinking about when are people having this conversation? I remember doing social media listening for a financial institution, and no one is going to Twitter and saying, I love my bank. They're only complaining when they get hit with overdraft fees, ATM's busted, so you have to also know it's like, okay, well, it's a really negative conversation, but we're less negative than we were, last week, and we're 10% less negative than we were last quarter. That's a positive trend. So that contextualization on the real-time voice of the customer is so key. So kind of a long rambling answer, but I think what I'm hopefully highlighting is the fact that it's really hard. Like you have to have a custom crafted solution because every business is different. Every customer base is different, and you need to find the right signals that matter because so often those ongoing real-time measures, be it survey or social or even sometimes hard behavioral data, you need the proper lens on it to be able to know what it means.
Yeah. Real quick to dovetail off what Ben's saying, don't you agree that it has to be constant as well? So, constant measurement. So like you said, having the right contextualization about what people are saying. If we're only monitoring in certain times, how do you really know what's a trend and what's not a trend, what's new and what's not new? Sometimes it takes some convincing on our end that voice of customer research is an ongoing sort of an event. You can't just do it in specific moments in time. You can, but there could be an extensive amount of dialogue that you're missing to give you the right context for where people's opinions and perspectives and insights are coming from. So it's really a constant sort of a thing that needs to be done all the time if you want to make sure you're monitoring what the customer is saying and have the right sort of context for what they're saying and when they're saying it, what are the factors that are impacting their perspectives and attitudes. Yeah.
And I think so often organizations, because they may be, say it is B2B or you're in manufacturing or not maybe mass consumer focused, but how should pop culture and these kind of insights and what you're hearing really play a role in the tone and how you're approaching all communications? Basically kind of getting to those insights, right, that we know of how people are behaving out in the world is going to relate to how they're behaving in the workplace or when they're making buying decisions. And Ben, maybe I'll throw it back to you since our data spoke.
It's a great point. And I think maybe what you're getting at is that notion of kind of indirect signals versus direct signals.
Yes.
And it is key. What does the fact that the world of kind of business and professional communications has evolved to a virtual one. And, so of course there's kind of direct implications for what that means for technologies like Zoom or Microsoft Teams. But then it's like, well, okay, what does that mean for the travel industry? And then all of the various offshoots on that. What does it mean for kind of next door behavior? So if people are comfortable having this kind of business relationship, what does that mean as it relates to their retail shopping experience? Well, okay, there's going to be an impact on the malls. So all of these things, you're probably only 3 steps away from these kind of major changes in culture having an impact on your business, and trying to suss that out and look around corners and figure out strategically what are the implications of these things that today may be unrelated and certainly yesterday you wouldn't have paid attention to. How do you take all of that in and think about the implications for the future of your business?
Right. And RJ, for you, as a research strategist, like how most clients aren't going to come to you with this being something that they want included into their research that they're conducting. They're usually pretty specific about what they're looking to get answers to. So how do you see kind of moving forward? How are you having that conversation with clients about adding these other insights into kind of their overarching research strategy?
Yeah, that's a good question. Some of the things that, through the process of, you mentioned user experience is one of my, I got a certification in user experience a couple of years ago through the Nielsen Norman Group related to specifically for website design and development. And there's so many applications in the user experience world, specifically the ideas behind design thinking. And what I love so much about design thinking, and it's kind of a broad term and it can be used in a lot of different ways, but what I like about it is it puts people at the center of everything. And putting people at the center of everything of what you're trying to do is really how you can come up with the best solutions for the problems that people are trying to solve. Or what's the job that the consumer or the B2B person or the manufacturer is trying to be done. So I think that putting it in the right terms, there are certain things that are only relevant to a specific customer base or a specific audience in the manufacturing world. We do a lot of healthcare research. There are things that are more germane and relevant to those individuals. So too often research can use a very broad approach and a broad stroke to solve a lot of problems for a lot of different industries. So we've tried to take a couple of steps back, be more specific to who is the audience that we're trying to conduct research with, what is the job that they're trying to be done, and taking an approach with empathy at the heart of what we're doing to help these people solve their problems. What is the jobs that they're trying to accomplish, and kind of using this idea of design thinking and what are, empathy mapping and some of the different things that we can do to solve problems for the individual that are more unique and specific as opposed to being overly broad in our approach and therefore possibly missing the mark, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So COVID has obviously had a huge impact in our lives, in our work, and community, and everything. With you guys' expertise over the last 9 months, what are some of the insights, RJ, I'll start with you, insights that you're seeing from COVID impacting that are trends that are really going to be affecting our behaviors and things moving forward over the next 18 months?
Yeah, great question. And I'm kind of wondering that will things potentially get more emotional, more personal as do we start to starve for more human interaction and experiences? Preparing for this, I have to admit, I have a collared shirt on today. I have a whole host of clothes in my closet that are still in their dry cleaner wrappings that are saying, please play with me. So virtual is great. Zoom meetings are great, but are we going to get to a point where authenticity and realness, that being more of a trend, right? So, virtual, now we're in everybody's home. Right before we started this meeting, my wife was upstairs and the dog was drinking the coffee. The CEOs are on TV and the little kid runs across the room. So maybe we're going to be more real. We're going to strip some of the boundaries away, the barriers away that, all of us have a different understanding and appreciation for we've seen each other's homes. So I'm wondering though if we'll see the inverse down the road, that maybe we want more in person, maybe we want more human interaction, maybe some of those nostalgic sorts of transactions that we used to have. And like we talked about initially about doing a lot of online focus groups, will we want to switch back to more personal, more face-to-face settings? So I'm kind of wondering if we're going to get some Zoom fatigue, virtual fatigue, and have a thirst for more human interaction and be more emotional and more real, given that we've been kind of forced into a more, this is the new normal, but it wasn't the normal prior to this. So it really makes me wonder to what extent, that's going to be something that we're going to be dealing with down the road. And there's so many options right now that customers have. It's not just like going to the store to get groceries. It's cashier checkout or self-checkout, order and pick up, order and deliver, order online through additional partners. This is the new norm, and there's so many different interactions. And from a research standpoint, I think we have to pay attention to, again, what are the jobs to be done for these consumers? And there are so many different touch points and so many different interactions that are happening just over a transaction about where you might get dinner, or that have to be monitored and to make sure that businesses are communicating and doing their work effectively. But I really believe, and I'm curious to what Ben's thoughts are on this, given the movie industry and going to movie theaters and all of these things used to be such big events. If he's potentially going to see kind of the inverse of what's been so virtual to maybe a more personal, maybe in a more emotional sort of an approach that the industry might want to have going down the road. Because I kind of feel that that's the way we're going to go.
It was a perfect segue, RJ. Thank you. Ben.
It was. And RJ, you're so right. I mean, that's been I've logged hundreds of hours of debate and research trying to answer that very question. When theaters reopen and the big movies are back and available there, are people wanting to go back? And people are generally pretty lousy predictors of their own behavior. If you ask what they're going to do, they will give you an answer, and it may be wrong because they're really, it's hard. And RJ, you talked about that notion of emotion. And I think that's right. I think that people can make an intellectual decision. And that intellectual decision for one person may be, yes, when it's safe and the theaters reopen, I cannot wait to go back because I've always loved going to the movies. What they're not able to understand is, what is that feeling going to be like when you are sitting in a closed room with a couple hundred strangers after being, away from humanity for kind of self-preservation for a year or more. What is that impact going to be? And there's so many competing forces there, and anyone who has a definitive answer and kind of pounds the table and says this is what's going to happen, they don't know. They're wrong. And for everyone, I think it's going to be something that we have to, again, to go back to that notion of speed and change, keep up with in near real time. Because I think, when we go back to something that resembles real life, it's going to be with fits and starts. It's not going to be, a flipping of a light switch and everything changes. And, when we look back at this time a couple years from now, I think we're going to see with great clarity those things that behaviorally came back in a way that looked very much like what it was pre-COVID. And there's going to be things that are changed forever. And we don't yet know what those are. I think everyone has opinions, and we do a lot of monitoring of those opinions to try to keep pace with it all. But until you are actually out in the world and in those environments, you just may not know.
Yeah, it could be you go back to the movie theaters, wearing a mask. I have a feeling, whether you like masks or not, mask mandates or wearing masks are going to be part of culture or part of what we're going to be doing for a while. I think that, I don't know about you, but I've gotten used to, I can tell if someone's smiling at me or not when they're wearing a mask, just by watching their eyes. You've kind of evolved in that to a certain extent. But yeah, for sure, I think that you make some really good points on that.
So I do have a couple of questions to share. The first one is really around incentives, and how do you think, or maybe how have you seen incentives change, or have they changed to get people to participate? Used to be when you come to a focus group, you might get some sort of you might get paid to come to the focus group. You might get some sort of a gift card or something like that. Is the online changing anything around incentives or motivations to get people to participate? So we'll start with that question.
Yeah, great question. So from our perspective, typically for in-person research, there was a larger incentive required to get individuals to show up. Obviously, that's going to also have to do with who is it that we're conducting market research with? Is this somebody maybe in the physician or healthcare community? Are they a harder to reach target? Are we talking about business executives? Obviously, those individuals tend to command a higher incentive. But if we're looking at the consumer world, there are a couple of different things that have an impact on us when we're putting together costs for a qualitative project. It's going to be how difficult it is to find these people and to get them to show up. And what do we got to pay them to show up? Recruiting fees, from our perspective, consumer-wise, for just your garden variety consumer, have dropped a little bit just because it's easier for people. The desire to want to participate, we stripped out so many of the potential barriers. I talked about them a little bit earlier. We started to talk to people about what's it like to do research with us, what's it like to do a in-person session. And we found that there was a lot of anxiety and a lot of stress, just even getting in the car. How do I look right? Again, performing for the glass. Am I going to sound intelligent? We strip a lot of that out when it's a virtual chat-based session. So therefore, it's going to cost less to get people to want to show up because it's not as difficult. So, incentives for online research, depending on what we're doing, anywhere from $75 to $125. We still use incentives for that. It's a great way, obviously, it's just kind of the way our contract with individuals for participating in research. So we found that, it's again, the whole process is easier. The overall costs are typically reduced because we're not having to pay for travel and market research facilities and things of that nature. So incentives are still part of the equation, but we found that we can usually probably offer a less amount of an incentive to get people to participate in an online session versus in person.
Yeah, we're seeing the same thing. And that's true for kind of quantitative survey-based research too. Those costs have dropped. And I think the other kind of interesting wrinkle in all of this is with more economic uncertainty and, especially kind of at the last summer, at the height of economic turmoil, we just saw a lot more people who were had the time and the desire to make a little bit more money who are participating in research. So the pool of potential respondents has been growing too.
Great, thank you. Okay, so another question. We agency and marketing folks, we love and value research, but often our clients don't want to invest or take the time to dig into customer insights nearly as much as we think that they should. Do you have any tips for selling the value or the benefits of research, especially right now, to our clients or to other organizations?
I can start with that one. Yeah, it's because I'm a recovering agency person myself. I worked in ad agencies for the first part of my career and then transitioned over to the research side of the fence. And I think that it's a bit of a trite phrase, but just that notion of being penny wise and pound foolish. I think so often the costs, certainly of creative and production, but even more importantly of media, is so outweighs what can happen on the research side. And the research side, it feels like that easiest thing you can lop off because it's not necessarily integral to the idea of a campaign being launched. Like you can launch a campaign without research. You'll be able to create something and produce it and put it on air or in the pages of periodicals or online, and you've got a campaign and it's going to do something. So it's not necessarily conspicuous in its absence. But what it does is make sure that you're aiming in the right direction. And it can saved so much money in terms of failed creative messaging, in terms of wasted media dollars, that, you know, it's a bit of an insurance policy. You know, you believe in your gut ideas, you believe in your trusted agency partners, you believe in this campaign that you can't wait to launch. But that research at the head end, and also, by the way, throughout the campaign and at the end of the campaign to measure effectiveness, all of that is going to be that work that ensures that you're not wasting money. And it's a conversation that we're having less today than we used to a few years ago. I think a few years ago, people were very comfortable with just kind of running their marketing without research and without measuring its effectiveness. And today, I think it's really hard for a CMO to not be able to articulate, you know, at the head end, the research that allows the confidence for a campaign to go forward, and at the back end, the measurement to be able to prove what the value of that investment. And if they don't have that, I think most CEOs would you know, not be comfortable and look to make a change.
Mm-hmm. You know, from our perspective, some of the most successful research projects that we've done over the years are typically the ones that we were involved in the process early. And I understand that sometimes it takes some trust from the advertising agency side of things to bring in the research partner early. We have some research advertising partners that might do some of the initial discovery interviews and things up front. Costs are always an issue. Time can always be an issue. But when we've been involved in the process as a partner with our agencies, helping to solve the problem in the strategy phase is when we can typically come up with maybe some non-traditional research techniques that we didn't think of. Maybe it's digital diaries because we're trying to figure out where's the friction in the customer service experience that the individuals or our consumers are having. Maybe it's coming up with some unique ideas, some different types of non-traditional research that can really yield some great insights to produce a greater product, a more strategic message, advertising that's more on spot, you know, more doing what we want it to be doing because we were involved early. Sometimes we'll get an email or phone call and say, hey, we got an opportunity to do some qualitative, let's do some focus groups. And that's great. But when we're involved early on in the strategy process and then the discovery process and about what the true objectives are, sometimes research can come up with some different techniques and tactics that, you know, that by being included early can help create and provide some solutions that weren't there. Therefore, you get a better return on investment. And then, you know, therefore clients are more apt to want to invest in it because they've seen what it can do, because they can see the whole scope of what we can provide, not just, you know, a couple of things here and there as it relates to the whole research process.
Yeah, RJ, that's it's interesting because it goes along with something that we've talked about before. Is so often clients, it's kind of like they have an a la carte thing that they normally do with research, and they usually do that element. I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this. Looking at it's the beginning of the year, and people are planning and looking ahead for 3-year planning. Can you talk a little bit about why doing a 360 approach with research is so important, and why even more so today than maybe a few years ago?
Well, for sure. I mean, there's a lot of Me Too advertising out there, and customers are essentially growing weary of that. At the end of the day, how can you say something different that speaks to the heart of what people are trying to achieve?
Yeah.
And being unique, being different. There's a lot of clutter, especially in the stuff in Ben's world. So again, I go back to some of the things related to design thinking and putting people at the center of everything that you're doing. And it goes back to empathy, showing empathy for your consumer or for your customer, and taking the time to devise the right research that will really truly understand their needs and what they're going through. And when we do that, we typically find that the research is in the end creative and the end product is more direct, more impactful, and can be different than what's out there. Therefore, you're kind of swimming against the tide to a certain extent, which you want. You want to be different. You want to be a little bit disruptive at times. And it's, again, all about having a seat at the table to talk about all the different things, all the different tools that we have as a researcher, it's not just about doing surveys. It's not about doing, focus groups, and those are fine. But again, there's so many non-traditional techniques that we can do if we're brought in early and viewed as a true partner in the process. I know there's a lot of other factors that go into it. There's always budgets and timelines and things like that that can make involving market research in that 360 approach challenging. But the more we can have great relationships with clients that will allow us to have a seat at that table up front, there's a lot of different things, a lot of different elements of discovery that we can come up with that create just a better research project. And the chief marketing officer or those that are making the investment typically feel that it's money well spent because we were able to unearth a whole host of insights that differentiate them from the competition. And at the end of the day, they can really make a big difference. So I really feel strongly about two different things. One, it's being seated early, being part of that conversation. Again, it goes back to showing empathy for your customer or your consumer and really taking this idea of putting people at the center of everything that you're doing.
Yeah.
So to take off on that, RJ, one of our questions is about whether or not you have an example you could share of an insight that you discovered that really turned into a strong, unexpected, or even provocative, creative campaign. You're talking about there's so much clutter out there, but if you get a really great insight that maybe takes you in a different direction, an unexpected direction, do you have an example of how something like that came together after some research that you did for a client?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of the best way to phrase it. So, we do a lot of qualitative research, and one of the things that we're trying to uncover, and I'm trying to think of the best way to explain this without going into too much proprietary detail. We were sharing advertisements regarding a public service issue, and it was regarding infant mortality. And throughout the course of our market research and having a wide range of different conversations with consumers all across the state of Indiana, and we had some discussion about what exactly we want to show individuals. Do we talk about some of the hard impact elements of what are the repercussions of not following safe sleep practices, or what are some of the potential challenges that can come with, or the dangers of such. But we had some concern about whether we should actually show some creative that was really, really impactful and really hard hitting. And it was getting to the point where we actually were sharing that and doing that and taking a more disruptive approach, and being a little bit aggressive is the best way to say it, where we were able to identify what the true pain points were. It's a really unique kind of a scenario when we're trying to deal with human emotions and dealing with human tragedy. And sometimes you need to be hard hitting. You need to take some risks, and sharing some information with people that are a little bit unsettling to realize, this is what moves somebody from being indifferent to action. This is what's going to compel somebody to actually have a change in behavior. And sometimes it takes lots of research, and it takes asking hard and challenging questions. We kind of had to push our client a little bit on this because they wanted to be pretty safe and reserved. And we felt that in order to move the needle, you need to be a little bit daring. You need to be a little bit more disruptive in your approach, and taking trust in your research partner that as moderators and research professionals, we know where to probe. We know how far to push. And at times we need to take people outside of their comfort zone for the true insights to be revealed, if that makes sense.
I love that. You got to be uncomfortable. Ben, that's a good question for you too, I think, kind of looking at Catherine, if you want to reiterate what that question coming in, but what's an example of kind of like some insight that drove a successful idea?
Yeah, and I'm under so many NDAs, it's hard to speak in terms of specifics, but the biggest part of our job as a research company with the studios and the streaming services is helping them figure out what the hell a thing is. And by that, I mean, they've made a movie. It's a great movie. You can't advertise a movie by playing the movie itself because then no one's going to buy a ticket for that movie. You have to figure out what is it that's going to get somebody excited? How do you position it? And so we will do everything from early focus groups before something's even shot, where we're doing, concept tests, like who would you want to see in this role? Like what would make you want to see this more? Which characters or relationships are most intriguing to you? We do a lot of creative testing. Every movie that gets made has literally dozens of trailers cut for it. And sometimes you'll look at a trailer and it's like, well, that one looks like a horror movie and that one looks like a comedy. And it's all mapped back to the same, 90-minute movie. But they're trying to figure out what is it that's going to unlock that. And so we'll do creative testing against all of that material. Once that first piece goes out into the world, we're listening to social to see what people are responding to. And all of our notes back are sharpening and tightening that creative message to help people understand, okay, well, at the end of the day, this is a female-focused thriller. So too much horror is going to turn people off. Anything that gets a little cheesy, we're losing our young adults. And over the course of the campaign, it gets sharper and sharper, and we're really able to figure out what is it at the heart of this piece of amazing entertainment that's been made. What is the creative cell that's going to drive the most people to come in and experience it?
Great.
We're probably only got about 10 minutes left. So do we have any more questions, Catherine?
Yeah, we do have one more I'd like to try to squeeze in, and then we can wrap things up. The question is, with a renewed emphasis on diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, how are you getting more BIPOC voices into the research that you're doing, knowing that a lot of organizations haven't really been that good about doing that and being truly representative in the research that they've gathered in the past?
Good question.
It's a huge initiative for my firm, and to the point where we've actually brought in outside voices and experts in diversity and inclusion and representation to help us be better researchers. And as a company, we've got a very diverse group of people. Geographically, we've got people here in Indianapolis, LA, New York, London, and it's people from all backgrounds and points of view. But as we apply that to research, it is so critical. Like, even what language do we use? In terms of when we're having a focus group, do we talk about race in terms of Black or African American, or do we use a term like people of color? And it's one of the things that we're spending a lot of time in investing in, to understand how do we do so, not to be, quote unquote, politically correct, although there's an aspect of it where we want to be, good people and open and fair with the world. But really, how do we do it in such a way that we are not putting artificial biases into the findings? How do we do it so that we can get the most accurate reflection of opinions and have all the people that we're talking to feel like they are being seen, feel like they can have their voice be heard, and that doesn't kind of steer them in one direction or another. So it is, I think, it's a great question, because it's a huge issue for the research industry at large, and it's one that I think we're actively working to get better at, in a way I'm very proud of. But it's not a check a box, yes, we're good now. It's going to be an evolving and ongoing process to get better.
I'm curious, Ben, to what extent, how successful you've been in that regard. One of the challenges that we have had is not the desire to be inclusive. We would love to have as many African Americans or those of Hispanic and Latino descent participate in our research, whether we were very broad and inclusive in terms of how we ask questions regarding gender, but it's gender preferences. It's super challenging, though, to get. There's not a lot of African Americans and Hispanics on panels, specifically when you're doing research in Indiana. It's just a lower percentage of the population. They're not on panels. Are really challenging to find in research, to get to participate in survey independent and in focus groups, just because they're just harder to find. We found that some people in those communities are a little bit distrusting of research and therefore less apt to want to participate. We've made it a significant emphasis in 2021 to be broader and more inclusive. But there are challenges that we've found just in terms of it's hard to find some of these people just because there's just lesser of them to a certain extent. I don't know if you've had challenges in that at all.
We haven't, but most of our work is not done here in Indiana. So I think we get to probably draw from a more diverse population base, which certainly helps. I do think, though, that one of the things that we've been thinking about is if it is hard to get an underrepresented portion of the populace to participate in a particular kind of research, let's say focus groups or IDIs, what are the other ways that we can find and unearth those opinions? And can we identify what's missing in our audience mix and augment those forms of research with other forms that may better represent those voices? And again, it's going to change from situation to situation, but it is something I'm pleased that I think the industry as a whole is taking a long look at and figuring out how do we make sure that we're fairly representing all audiences and translating those voices into meaningful insights on behalf of our clients.
Perfect.
I love that. And I think it kind of sums up kind of where we are in the world right now too, of realizing like we can't expect things to maintain being the same way, right? We've got to figure out, like, if it's not working this way, we got to figure out how to change it and adapt and change and do something, because there is no one way, right? And I think that we're all we've been forced to kind of open our eyes to being open to adapting quickly, which I think is just going to be a beautiful thing moving forward. So thank you to Ben and RJ for the conversation today. If you have more questions, feel free to shoot them out to us and we will get those over to RJ and Ben and get back to you. And if you have suggestions for future topics or somebody in mind that you'd like to see on a panel, please let us know. Future shop chats are going to be available. You can look at those, what's coming up on the website as well. So thank you so much. We really enjoyed this. We appreciate you guys coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.